Hello, my name is Ava Whitmore, and when I was 17, my parents kicked me out with nothing but a suitcase and a warning. You'll be back begging in a month. My mom said it with a smirk. My dad didn't say anything at all, just turned away. I wasn't perfect, but I never thought being different meant being disposable. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love you first, this story is for you. You'll be back begging in a month, my mother said with a smirk so sharp it split me deeper than the words ever could. The suitcase felt heavier than it had that morning, even though nothing had changed inside it. Same set of folded jeans, same worn sketchbook tucked between t-shirts, same pair of flats that had lost their grip long ago. But now it was weighty with finality. I stood on the porch heat rising off the concrete, my back to the front door that had just been slammed with a ferocity only Diane Whitmore could summon. Just hours earlier, I had sat across from the State Art Scholarship panel, my voice trembling as I explained the inspiration behind my digital concept piece. They had smiled, nodded, asked thoughtful questions. One woman had even said, "You've got something rare." I carried that sentence home like a flame cupped between my palms, fragile, flickering, sacred. I thought maybe this time they'd see me, but the house had been cold. Not the temperature, just still. No sounds from the kitchen, no smell of dinner. Diane had been in the living room, arms crossed like she'd been waiting to confront a trespasser. Gregory stood behind her, hands folded, face unreadable. "You're late," she said, though I wasn't. "You didn't think to call." I texted, I replied. The interview ran long. They liked my portfolio. Her eyes narrowed. Portfolio. She said it like it was a disease. "I think I have a chance," I offered, voice shaking. "They said I'm in the top 5. She laughed short, sharp. "And what exactly does that get you? A lifetime of starving in someone's attic drawing logos for kombucha brands?" I felt my mouth open, words forming, then breaking. "It's a full scholarship if I make final selection." "Do you even hear yourself?" she barked. "We've sacrificed so much to give you structure, and you keep chasing fantasies. You embarrassed us. That counselor called me, said you went behind our backs to apply." "I didn't need your permission," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was thunderous. Diane took one slow step forward. "You think because you know how to draw shadows, you understand the real world. You're 17, Ava. You live under our roof, and this little rebellion ends now." I turned to Gregory. "Dad." He didn't speak. Just turned, walked toward the hallway closet, pulled out the suitcase. My suitcase. The one he gave me when I was 12. "For when you travel to college," he had said. "First class if I have anything to do with it." Now he set it by the door without a word. His eyes never met mine. I stepped back, stunned. "You're serious, I warned you," Diane said like this was discipline, not exile. "You want to be independent. Fine. Be independent." "I have nowhere to go," I whispered. "You should have thought of that before you chose art over reality." I don't remember what else was said, just the heat on my neck, the pulse in my ears, the rage and disbelief colliding into static. When she opened the door, the sound of it was almost gracious, like she was showing me out of a hotel room past checkout time. And then came the line. "You'll be back begging in a month." She said, her voice low and amused. Then she smiled, not wide, but curved like a blade, and with that she slammed the door shut. It didn't just close, it sealed. I stood there staring at the door, heart pounding like a second sun in my chest. I could hear my breath, hear the street noise down the block, hear the subtle creak of the porch wood under my weight. Nothing else. The air was thick, the heat wave unrelenting. I picked up the suitcase, my hands shaking, and stepped off the porch. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I wasn't sure I wouldn't turn to stone. At the corner bus stop, I sat on the bench with my sketchbook clutched to my chest. It was the only thing I'd packed that wasn't practical. No charger, no plan. Just a leather-bound book with uneven edges, half-filled pages, and smudged graphite dreams. The sun had started to lower, burning a little orange around the edges. A bus pulled up, number 208, destination Granville. I didn't know where that was exactly. I just remembered it from a school map once. A small town, a dot. Far enough. The driver gave me a look, not unkind, but wary. like he was used to seeing people at crossroads and he knew better than to ask. I paid with the cash I'd scraped from my summer shifts, 2 20s, one crumpled 10, and a few coins that clicked like punctuation as they fell into the fare slot. I took a window seat near the back. As the engine rumbled to life, I pressed my forehead to the glass and stared at the fading sky. Ava boards the evening bus to Granville, destination unknown, heart cracked, but strangely steady. I didn't choose Granville. It was simply where the bus stopped, and I didn't. The town greeted me in silence. No honking cars or bustling intersections, just a stretch of sleepy storefronts under street lamps that buzzed like old fluorescent lights. The windows of most buildings were dark save for one, the back room. Its name was hand-painted in faded gold lettering across the glass. The display window held a pyramid of hardcovers, all stacked slightly crooked, like someone rearranged them once and never quite committed to symmetry. Behind the glass, a single lamp cast a warm glow onto a wooden floor. Dust hung in the air like suspended time. I stood across the street, hugging my arms against the cool night. The bus ride had drained me. Granville was farther than I expected, but I hadn't asked questions when the driver called the stop. I just stepped off, unsure if my legs were still following my own decisions or the rhythm of panic. A crumpled flyer fluttered from my hoodie pocket as I shifted my grip on the suitcase. I'd picked it up off the bus seat beside me. Someone must have left it behind. A square of yellow paper with a sticker that read, "Books Heal. The Back Room. Granville." I didn't believe in signs, but I believed in somewhere to sit that wasn't a bench. So I crossed the street. The door didn't have a bell, but the creak announced me anyway. The smell hit first lavender oil, old paper, and cedar, comfort disguised as dust. I stepped inside, unsure how far to go. Wooden shelves lined every wall, some bowing under the weight of their contents. A patchwork rug spread across the floor like a forgotten quilt, and in the far corner stood a woman, hair silver and wild in that elegant way some women carry without trying. She was placing a teacup on a tray. She didn't look up right away, but then she did, and she saw me. "You look like someone who needs a chair more than a question," she said simply. I blinked. My voice had dried up somewhere between the last stoplight and the quiet in my chest. I nodded. She gestured toward a worn armchair near the register. "Go on, I won't bite." The chair accepted me like it had been expecting someone exactly my size. My suitcase leaned beside me like a silent witness. I touched the top zipper, half for comfort, half to reassure myself the sketchbook was still there. "I'm Marlene," the woman said, walking behind the counter. "Owner, occasional therapist, rarely both at once." "Ava," I said, barely louder than a whisper. She gave a soft nod, not too warm, not distant either. "You passing through?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. Sometimes, "not sure" is more honest than any plan. She disappeared through a side door, reappearing moments later with a blanket folded over one arm and a thermos in the other. "If you're staying longer than 15 minutes, I recommend upstairs. More forgiving chairs. Less draft." I hesitated. My body wanted to move, but something in my chest resisted. Not out of distrust, out of fear that accepting help would make it real. That I had truly arrived here by being cast out. She saw it, that flicker of conflict, but didn't press. "There's a couch," she said gently. "Not much, but better than concrete. You can sleep, or not. Nobody here keeps track." I rose slowly, joints aching from more than the ride. She led me up the narrow staircase tucked behind a shelf labeled, "Books No One Ever Finishes." I didn't smile, but my lip twitched. The attic space was simple. A sloped ceiling with visible beams, a worn rug, a narrow couch that looked hand-me-down soft. Stacks of boxes lined one wall topped with paperweights shaped like birds. A single reading lamp cast a buttery light. Marlene set the blanket on the armrest and placed the thermos on a small side table. "There's chamomile inside. Drink it or ignore it. I won't be offended either way." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You don't have to explain. Sometimes survival is reason enough." Then she left. I stood there a while, not moving, not sitting, not crying. The silence wasn't threatening. It was patient. I finally sat on the couch, still hugging myself. My fingers ached with the urge to draw, but my sketchbook remained zipped away. I wasn't ready to see anything yet, not even lines on a page. Beside the couch, half tucked under the table, was a thick guest book. Curiosity slipped past my walls before I could stop it. I pulled it onto my lap and opened to the first page. Each entry was in different handwriting, some scribbled, others neat. One said, 3 nights and 100 tears. Thank you. Another read, the cat didn't like me, but the tea did. I kept flipping. Page after page of short confessions, tiny victories, anonymous survival. It felt like a lineage I hadn't realized I was inheriting. I traced my finger over one sentence written in slanted cursive. I stayed here once, when I had nowhere else and no one left. It didn't fix me, but it gave me one quiet night. That was enough. I closed the book slowly and set it back. I didn't write anything, not yet. The blanket smelled like dried lavender. The couch dipped under my weight like it remembered every other body that had rested here, burdened and hollow. I curled my knees up, wrapped myself in the blanket, and stared at the ceiling beams. The wood was dark, knotty scarred, like it had seen fire once but refused to burn. My lips barely moved. The words were not for anyone but me. I won't go back. You ever hold a coffee pot like it might explode? That was Jaden's first question to me. Apparently, it was rhetorical. The morning roast was busier than I expected for a town like Granville. Bells above the door jingled as I entered, muffling the low hum of indie music drifting from wall-mounted speakers. Mismatched chairs surrounded repurposed tables. A chalkboard above the counter read, "Espresso yourself," or, at least fake it till the caffeine hits. The smell of burned sugar and strong coffee hung like a warm coat. I hadn't meant to come. But that morning, Marlene had placed my tea on the attic windowsill with a piece of newspaper tucked under the mug. One job listing had been circled in red ink, morning roast. Help wanted. A nudge. Not subtle, but kind. I'd stared at the ad for a long time before folding it in half and slipping it into my back pocket. The cafe was run by a woman who looked like she didn't believe in name tags or apologies. She had short cropped hair, a sleeve of ink on one arm, and dark eyes that missed nothing. She looked me up and down as I stood in front of the counter, fingers clenched around the newspaper scrap. Help wanted, I asked, my voice drier than I expected. You asking or telling? She replied, arching an eyebrow. Asking. She nodded once. Jaden Ross, owner. You're the stray Marlene sent. I opened my mouth to object, then stopped. I nodded. She leaned on the counter. You ever held a coffee pot like it might explode? I blinked. No. That was rhetorical, she said, smirking. Good. Means you're teachable. I didn't know if that was her version of an interview or a test. Maybe both. She walked around the counter, tossed me an apron that smelled like cinnamon and something burnt. Name Ava. Okay, Ava. Here's the deal. Don't break anything. Don't touch the espresso machine unless I say so. And for God's sake, smile at least once a day, or customers will think we're running a funeral home. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, so I did. Barely. She handed me a rag. Wipe tables. Try not to look like you're being punished. The first 20 minutes of my trial shift were a blur of dropped sugar packets, fumbling over creamers, and saying sorry more times than I had in the last year. A toddler spilled apple juice near the register, and I managed to slip while cleaning it, knocking into a tray of spoons that crashed like an alarm bell. Jesus, Jaden muttered, rubbing her temple, you allergic to gravity. I felt the burn creep up my neck. Maybe this was a mistake. But she was already waving me off. Take 5. Sit. Breathe. I retreated to a corner near the pastry case and collapsed into a wooden stool. My fingers found a stray napkin and a pen left by the register. Without thinking, I began to sketch. It was a habit I hadn't indulged in since the bus ride. A reflex more than a decision. The pen scratched lightly as I drew a steaming mug with little ghosts rising from it, each holding signs like "Save the Barista" and "Too Hot to Handle." I lost track of time. You did that. I jumped. Jaden stood over my shoulder, arms crossed, unreadable. Yeah, sorry, I'll throw it out. She snatched the napkin. Hell no, come with me. I followed her to the back wall where a blank chalkboard hung under the drink specials. The one there now read, latte. It's like a hug in a cup if hugs were jittery and bitter. Jaden handed me a box of chalk. Draw something. Make it weird. That was it. No further instruction. So I drew. It wasn't precise, chalk never is, but it was alive. A coffee cup with a monocle, a croissant doing yoga, steam that curled into vines. When I stepped back, I expected her to critique every inch. Instead, she said, "Okay, stay. What you're not great at refills, but people will come back just to see that." She jabbed her thumb toward the sign. I blinked. "That's it. I can't promise this job will fix your life," she said, adjusting a crooked menu. "But the coffee's real, and I pay on time." She walked away before I could answer. When my shift ended, Jaden tossed me a punch card with one corner marked. "One shift down. 4 more and you earn free sarcasm." I stepped out into the evening air, my shoes sticking slightly to the pavement from spilled syrup. My arms ached and my legs felt like water, but something inside had settled. Like a door had opened and someone didn't slam it behind me. Back in the attic, I dug through my backpack and pulled out the old laptop Marlene had stored with the forgotten chargers. It wheezed to life screen, blinking as if waking from a coma. I opened a file I hadn't touched in years. Its title blinked at me. Guest room. Fragments. I double-clicked and stared. If I write it like fiction, maybe it won't hurt as much. The cursor blinked on the blank Word document like a dare. A single desk lamp lit the attic bedroom, casting long shadows against the sloped ceiling. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. I hadn't touched it in over an hour, just stared fingers, poised, waiting for the storm inside me to translate into words. The title sat at the top of the page, The Guest Room. It had come to me somewhere between scrubbing sticky syrup off cafe chairs and dodging Jaden's sideways comments. A name simple enough not to draw attention, but loaded enough to make me flinch when I typed it. I thought of the girl in my story. Not Ava, someone else. Someone who didn't carry my name but carried my ache. She stood beside a dusty gas station suitcase in one hand, betrayal settling like ash in her lungs. She wasn't left behind, she was set free even if it didn't feel like it yet. At first I tried to be precise, real, honest. I wrote, her mother told her to pack light. What she meant was, don't expect to stay. But the words felt like glass shards, too close, too sharp. I backspaced, rewrote, the girl packed a toothbrush, a sweater, and a heart she didn't realize was still breakable. That felt better. Distant enough to breathe. Close enough to bleed. I didn't know how long I'd been writing. I measured time by how many sentences I wrote before my chest got tight. The room stayed silent except for the occasional creak of old floorboards below. Marlene had gone to bed hours ago. She left a small note tucked under my teacup. Good words find their own way out. At one point, Jaden had dropped off a set of clean mugs for Marlene, claiming they were a cafe overstock. She'd glanced at the screen as she passed behind me, caught the title, and raised one eyebrow. "That's either a memoir or a crime novel," she said, smirking. I didn't respond. And she didn't ask. She just tapped the edge of my laptop and walked off. I kept writing. There were parts I couldn't yet say plainly, moments that still made my stomach twist. Like the sound of the door slamming or the look in my father's eyes when he handed me the suitcase. Those pieces came out sideways. The fictional girl didn't cry on the porch. She didn't beg. She took the handle of her suitcase and walked until her feet blistered and her silence turned into armor. Still, some truths refused to stay hidden. I wrote, she stopped rehearsing conversations in her head, stopped wondering what she could have said to make them stay. Instead, she started making space for someone who might. I reread that line 4 times. Somewhere around page 7, I froze. There were 3 paragraphs where the girl was described crying in a bathroom stall, scared, furious, invisible. I hadn't planned that scene. It had spilled out. Word for word, it was mine, not hers. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I deleted the whole section. Not out of shame, but because it wasn't ready. Not like that. I rewrote it as if someone else were telling it. 3rd person. Slightly blurred. Just enough narrative distance to give the memory air to breathe. And when I finished, I leaned back. For the first time all week, I exhaled without shaking. Later, I printed 2 pages to leave on the shop counter tucked under Marlene's clipboard. I didn't say anything. By noon the next day, they were gone. That night, she passed me a cup of peppermint tea without comment. But as I turned to go upstairs, She said quietly, "Keep going." 2 words. But I felt them in my chest like permission. Back in the attic, I saved the document, then opened a browser window. I'd found the listing weeks ago on a writer's forum, call for entries, short fiction contest, theme unseen lives. I had bookmarked it, pretending I might someday be the kind of person who submitted things. My finger hovered over the mouse. The submission page looked like a cliff. I attached the document, entered my name, checked the little box that said I affirm this is my original work, and clicked submit. The laptop fan whirred like it was holding its breath. I didn't write this for them, I reminded myself. Not for Diane, not for Gregory, not even for Jaden or Marlene. This was mine. And mine was enough. When the email came, I read it 5 times before letting myself believe it wasn't a mistake. I was shelving used paperbacks at the front of the back room, rain pressing gently against the window like a heartbeat. Marlene was somewhere in the back, rearranging a shelf of first editions, humming under her breath. The store smelled like cinnamon from the scone she'd left half-eaten on the counter, and ink from the stack of freshly delivered poetry zines still in their plastic sleeves. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The subject line flashed. "Congratulations, your story. The guest room has been selected." I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the screen like it had materialized from a fever dream. The email was short, polite, formal. But one line burned into me. "We are thrilled to publish your piece under the byline A. Finch." Your voice moved us. A. Finch. The pseudonym I'd used without thinking, half from a leftover nickname Jaden once muttered while sipping her 3rd espresso, half from the sticky note Marlene had left on my tea one morning that simply read, "Finch, resilient, unbothered, flight-prone." I read the email again, then again. The 5th time I let my thumb hover over the archive button before thinking better of it. No, this needed to be saved. I didn't cry. I didn't jump. I just sat on the stool behind the register and exhaled in one long, shaking breath. For once, the silence around me felt earned. Jaden strode in 20 minutes later, dripping from the rain, smelling of damp denim and roasted beans. She shook off her jacket like a wet dog and caught my expression. "What'd you break?" she asked. Then, narrowing her eyes, "Wait, you won something, didn't you?" I turned the phone toward her. She read the email once, then twice, then grinned. Not the wide-toothy kind, but the crooked one that always came with trouble. "Print it," she said. "What, print the story?" "Big font. I'm taping that sucker to the cafe fridge." "You can't." But she was already dialing her printer from her phone, dragging me toward the machine in the corner of the bookstore's back office. 10 minutes later, a sheet of crisp white paper was up on the cafe fridge, held by a magnet shaped like a disgruntled avocado. Jaden crossed her arms proudly. "Art stays," she said. "And besides, it gives the regulars something to stare at while pretending to pick muffins." Back at the store, Marlene didn't say anything at first. Just went about her quiet rituals, stacking returned books, setting out bookmarks. Then, while I was restocking the poetry section, she slipped a sticky note beside my mug of cooling tea. Written in her soft, deliberate script. "Congratulations, Miss Finch." I pressed the note into my sketchbook like it might disappear if left out in the air. That evening, I refreshed the blog page more times than I cared to admit. The story had gone live, complete with a short bio. Finch is a writer living in a small town. This is her first publication. Underneath, the comments started slowly. A beautifully written. Then a, "This hit too close." And then the one that cracked something inside me. I thought I was the only one. I sat back, eyes stinging. I didn't know who they were or where they lived or why my story reached them, but they felt it. My voice, my version had found someone. Later that night, back in the attic, I lit a small candle on the windowsill. The flame flickered against the glass, reflecting a version of myself I was still getting used to. On the other side of town, hundreds of miles away, Diane Whitmore sat in her kitchen, scrolling Facebook with her 2nd glass of wine in hand. A friend had shared the link. This one made me cry. Raw and gorgeous. The title caught her eye. "The Guest Room" by A. Finch. She clicked. Her eyes scanned the first lines. Slowed, narrowed. Somewhere in the rhythm, somewhere in the turns of phrase and the soft jaggedness, she heard something familiar, something unmistakable. and she kept reading. The email subject line read, "Congratulations, we'd love to talk." But it was the name in the signature that made my chest go tight. It was a slow morning. Rain tapped on the attic window like it had been there all night, unwilling to leave. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my laptop balanced on an old storage box, cold tea within reach. The attic was quiet even for a Tuesday. Below, I could hear Marlene humming, sorting through donation books. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, still sticky with nerves from the night before. I had just hit refresh again when the new message appeared. Subject: "Congratulations, we'd love to talk." From Elise Warren, Acquisitions Editor, Stoney and Birch Press. I opened it with the same caution I used to open letters from school, half expecting praise, half bracing for correction. But this was neither. "We've been following the incredible response to your short story. Your voice is intimate, unfiltered, and important. We'd love to discuss a limited-run collection under your byline A. Finch. Are you open to a virtual call?" I reread it. And again. A third time, I reached the signature block Elise Warren, and that's when my chest tightened. Elise had once been the senior editor at Citrine Teen, the online lit mag I'd submitted to at 15. She'd sent a rejection email with the line, "There's something in your voice. Don't give up. Just wait until you're ready." I'd buried that email in a folder named "Don't Be Naive." Now 3 years later, she was back. And she wanted me. Or rather, she wanted A. Finch. Jaden found me still frozen an hour later, standing in the back of the morning roast with the printed email in one hand and my untouched espresso in the other. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, sliding behind the counter. "Or worse, a tax form." I passed her the page. She skimmed it quickly, then whistled low. "Big leagues and fancy font. No typos. That's how you know they mean business." I tried to smile. Couldn't. "They want to publish me," I said, still not believing it. Jaden leaned her elbows on the counter. "And they want me to stay anonymous." "Ah," she said. "The mysterious outsider artist thing. Very Banksy. Very broody. They think the name A. Finch adds mystery. That it's part of the appeal." Jaden shrugged. "They're not wrong. I don't know if I want to be a mystery," I admitted. "But I don't want recognition either. Not from the wrong people." She gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "You can't hide forever, Ava. Not if you want to be heard." That night, I paced the attic. My laptop sat open on the desk, the contract PDF glowing softly. I printed it anyway, the sound of the old printer like a heartbeat against the silence. At the bottom of the last page was a signature line author print name, signature date. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up the pen. I wrote A. Finch, Ava Whitmore. Then I paused, and slowly, deliberately, I crossed out Ava Whitmore, a single heavy line. Not because I was ashamed, because I wasn't ready to be found. Just as I slid the signed page back into the envelope, my inbox pinged again. Subject, local feature, Granville Voices series from Emily Chen. Staff reporter, Body High A. Finch, we're profiling rising local authors. Would love to meet in person for a quick interview. My heart kicked once, then twice. I walked on stage under someone else's name. But when I started reading, every word belonged to me. The library's community room, in downtown Portland, was lit by warm overhead bulbs and crammed with folding chairs. Rows of strangers shuffled their programs, whispering politely, waiting for the first reader. The air buzzed with the sound of caffeine nerves and microphone static. I sat in the second row, flanked by 2 other authors, one younger than me, fidgeting with her scarf. The other, older, grinning like this was his 3rd reading this week. I didn't say much. My palms were damp. My foot bounced under the seat. I clutched the printed pages of the guest room like they might disappear if I blinked too long. When the host called A. Finch, it felt like I was being summoned to perform a magic trick I hadn't rehearsed. I stood slowly. My legs worked somehow. Jaden had been right. Again. "Watch," she said last week, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Next thing I know, you'll be signing books and sipping hotel tea." I wasn't sipping tea, but I was walking toward a microphone under fluorescence. Close enough. I adjusted the stand, swallowed. The mic squealed once, then hushed. "My piece is called The Guest Room," I said. No one moved. So I read. It started quietly, but somewhere around the second paragraph I found a rhythm. Not theatrical, just mine. The voice I'd used alone in the attic shaping bruises into metaphors. And as the words spilled into the room, I felt something shift. People leaned forward. A woman in the third row clutched a tissue. A young man near the wall closed his eyes like he was listening for a memory. I reached the line. She wasn't left behind. She was freed with scars, yes, but also with space. I heard someone gasp. By the time I finished, the room was quiet in that reverent way that means something had landed. Then claps. A few on their feet. Someone murmured, "Thank you." I stepped down slowly, heat blooming in my chest, not from embarrassment, but something else. Ownership. Back at my seat, I stared at my hands. They were still trembling, but I wasn't. After the event, a line of attendees shuffled over. Some just nodded, others pressed notes into my palm. One girl whispered, "I didn't know I needed that until now." Then he approached. A man in his late 40s, jeans too neat to be casual, holding a press pass tucked into a canvas notebook. His smile wasn't unkind, but it was sharp. Curious. "You're A. Finch," he said. I nodded. "Miles Grant," he offered. "Cascadia Weekly. Culture Beat." "That cadence you've got, it's familiar." I stiffened. He didn't press. Just pulled a card from his coat pocket and handed it to me. "I used to interview your mother." I blinked. He lowered his voice, stepping slightly closer. "She once told me on record that girls like you confuse rejection with trauma." The words landed like glass on tile, shards everywhere. Miles held my gaze. "I think it's time someone told the real version." Then he turned and walked off, leaving only the card in my hand and the weight of a memory I thought I'd buried for good. When I saw my mother's email address in my inbox, it felt like a trap disguised as a door. The subject line was blank. That was the first red flag. It was late, the bookstore hushed in its usual nighttime hush. Outside, the streetlights spilled soft amber across the sidewalk, but inside, only one lamp glowed above the front desk. I sat alone, laptop open, the soft tick of the wall clock the only sound besides my own shallow breath. From Diane Whitmore. Subject. No subject. Time. 8:12 p.m. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I clicked. "We saw the article. We saw the story. You made us look like monsters." No greeting, no apology, just accusation precise and sharp like the edge of one of her perfectly manicured nails. "This isn't how family works, Ava. You air dirty laundry, you burn bridges. What happened to dignity, to gratitude? You should have come to us instead of broadcasting to the world." My throat went dry. I read the email twice, then again, as if maybe the screen would soften on the third read. It didn't. Then almost immediately after, another notification pinged. From Gregory Whitmore, subject, Ava. "I didn't stop her, I should have. I'm sorry I didn't say anything, I didn't know how." That was it. A whisper of remorse from the man who'd handed me a suitcase at 17 and walked back inside without a glance. I stared at the screen, my chest still, my eyes burning. Marlene's words echoed like a quiet bell in my mind. "They'll reach out when you no longer need it. That's how silence works." Jaden appeared in the doorway of the back room, holding a chipped mug of coffee. She didn't ask. Just set the mug beside me. No questions, no commentary, only the small wordless offering that had somehow become her signature. I nodded just once. The emails sat on the screen like stains. I opened a reply box, typed, deleted. Tried again. "You don't get to narrate this now." Backspaced. "I deserved more than your silence." Backspaced again. I stared at the blinking cursor until the whole thing blurred. Then I closed both drafts. I didn't send anything. Instead, I opened a new document, titled it, "The Room I Was Erased From," and I began to write. I wrote about birthday cupcakes eaten by someone else, about sketchbooks buried under socks, about the way silence can be louder than a scream when it's aimed at a child trying to matter. The words came easier than I expected. Each line was a reclaiming, each paragraph a line drawn in permanent ink. And just as I reached the final sentence of the new opening, just as I typed, some people call it estrangement, I call it survival, a new email arrived, subject Granville Community Night, speaker invitation from City of Granville Cultural Committee. My eyes skimmed the message. A reading slot, Community showcase. Local voices. Date. June 14th. Venue Granville Civic Hall. My heart hiccuped. June 14th. My mother's birthday gala. The one she threw every year like a coronation. Same night. Same kind of spotlight. But this time, it would be mine. Of all the halls in Oregon, they picked the one with 2 entrances and 1 shared parking lot. I parked farther away than I needed to. The Civic Center glowed a head-glass facade catching the last amber streaks of sunset. 2 sets of double doors gleamed under identical brass awnings left for the West Wing Community Reading Night, right for the grand ballroom. Above the right entrance hung a banner in gold script, Diane Whitmore, celebrating 60 elegant years underneath a valet-guided guests with rhinestone clutches and designer heels towards champagne trays and floral centerpieces. I stood outside the left doors, fingers wrapped around my copy of The Guest Room, trying to remember how to breathe. The last time I stood under a marquee, I was 16 and invisible. Now I was scheduled to speak under a pen name, knowing full well the woman who once called me a disappointment was just 50 feet away throwing herself a coronation. I almost turned around. Then I saw Miles. He was standing by a poster display near the registration table, a collage of printed quotes from tonight's featured writers. My name, or rather A. Finch, was in block letters above one of my newest lines. She left me with silence. I rebuilt it into language. Beside it, in smaller font but unmistakable, was a quote from a 2015 Cascadia Weekly interview. Some girls confuse rejection with trauma. That doesn't make it less dramatic, it makes it indulgent. Diane Whitmore. I blinked. Miles, standing nearby, caught my reaction. He nodded slowly, then said, "Context is a strange revenge, isn't it?" I swallowed hard. Jaden appeared from behind the curtain of milling volunteers, eyes scanning me up and down. She wore all black as usual and carried a thermos she swore contained water, but I was certain had something stronger. "Still want to run?" she asked, not unkindly. A little, I admitted. She grinned. "No one's louder than truth well told." And that was all she said before nudging me toward the prep area. The community hall was modest folding chairs in neat rows, fairy lights strung across acoustic panels, but there was a sacred hush about it. People filtered in programs in hand eyes soft with curiosity. A woman offered me a lapel mic. I clipped it on with fingers that didn't feel like mine. When my name was called A. Finch, I stepped up, heart-thudding but steady. I didn't read the published piece. Not tonight. I read something new. I looked up at the crowd, into their eyes, and said, "This is called What She Forgot to Name." Then I began. She left me with silence. I rebuilt it into language. She left me with a name I no longer answer to, and I grew one with wings. She left me at the edge of expectation and told me it was freedom. But I kept walking, and what I found wasn't escape. It was origin. The room was still. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. I kept going. She believed the louder voice won. But sometimes the one that listens survives. She left me unseen, and I made visibility an art form. When I stepped down, I felt something in me lock into place. Not closure, something deeper. Claiming. Backstage applause still murmuring like distant waves, Jaden held out the thermos. "Damn," she said. That hit harder than caffeine. And then, like a shift in wind, I heard it. A gasp. A crash. In the ballroom across the hall behind thick walls and heavy decor, someone had dropped a wine glass. Later, I'd learn it was Diane. She'd heard my voice. And she knew. When she appeared in the doorway, I thought of the day she threw my suitcase out. Not the words, just the sound. The slam of it. That dull thud of metal hitting wood. No screaming. No storm. Just the clean, hollow punctuation of exile. Now here she was. Diane Whitmore, my mother. Standing under the buzz of a backstage hallway's fluorescent light like some uninvited echo from a lifetime ago. Her gown shimmered deep blue silk, probably. Hair perfect. Nails still shaped like warnings. But her eyes, when they met mine, weren't sharp. Just searching. "Can we talk?" she said. I didn't move. I didn't offer a nod or a gesture. Just stepped back a pace far enough that the overhead light framed a space between us. Enough room for the years, for the damage, for the things never said. Diane walked closer, but not too close. Always aware of distance when it mattered to her. That reading. She started voice. Low eyes not quite on me. You made it sound like we left you to rot in a ditch. I blinked. You left me at 17 with a suitcase and a list of reasons why I'd fail. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. No, I said. Tell me what it was like then. Because I remember birthdays with gas station cupcakes, college letters tossed unopened, a father who couldn't meet my eyes, and a mother who could only look at me when she was disappointed. She looked stung, but not surprised. We were trying to prepare you, toughen you up. For what, Silence? For convincing myself I didn't need to be loved to survive. Her voice rose slightly brittle. You always twisted things, Ava, always so sensitive, and you were always so careful with your cruelty. You handed it out in teaspoons and smiled while doing it. Footsteps echoed. I glanced down the hallway. Gregory. He approached slower than her, like maybe he didn't expect to be let in. He looked older, grayer. The years had not missed him, but neither had they softened him. Ava, he said quietly. I should have spoken up. I held his gaze. But you didn't. I didn't know how. I almost laughed. You knew how to hand me a suitcase. You knew how to walk away without looking back. He stepped forward. We made mistakes. No, I said. You made choices. Silence is a choice. Diane crossed her arms. So this is what you wanted, a moment to humiliate us, paint us as villains in a library basement. I stared at her for a long beat. No. I didn't come back for revenge. Her mouth curled in disbelief. I didn't come back for permission. I continued. I came back to end the echo, to stop it from repeating in my own head. She looked like she wanted to speak something to fix it, something to reframe. But for once, nothing came. Gregory shifted beside her, mouth opening, then closing. I have nothing left to ask from either of you, I said, and nothing I need to prove. I stepped past them, walked the length of that cold hallway with steady legs and breath I didn't have to rehearse. Behind me, silence. No protests. No commands. For the first time in my life, no one called my name to stop me. You were brave, someone whispered. But I wasn't sure bravery felt like shaking in a bathroom stall. The fluorescent light buzzed above me like it had been waiting for this exact moment to flicker. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet in the farthest stall, fingers clenched so tightly around my phone that my knuckles blanched. My shoulders pressed against the cold tile wall, as if anchoring myself to something solid might calm the storm still raging inside my chest. I hadn't cried. Not exactly. But the shaking wouldn't stop. My breath came in shallow stutters, and I kept hearing her voice the way Diane said, You always twisted things as if the years of erasure were my invention. The way Gregory looked like he'd misplaced something and never thought to ask if it had a heartbeat. I didn't want to be here. Not anymore. Outside the stall, footsteps echoed, measured, familiar. Jaden. I'm not knocking, she said, voice quiet but certain. Just here. Take your time. Silence stretched between us like a weighted blanket, the kind that smothers before it soothes. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down. Miles Grant, that wasn't a reading. That was an earthquake. Hope you know that. I stared at the message. Let it sit there like a stone in my palm. Another buzz. Marlene voice call missed. Then a follow-up. Call me when you're ready. I made that weird rose tea you like. The lump in my throat swelled but still wouldn't break. I finally stood. The mirror above the sink showed a girl with colorless lips and mascara beginning to flake under her lashes. But her eyes, my eyes were focused. Still there. Still standing. I opened the door. Jaden leaned against the tiled wall, sipping from her ever-present thermos. She didn't comment on my puffy face or the tremor in my step. Just handed me a folded granola bar and walked ahead like nothing happened. We reached her car, an old Honda that smelled faintly of lavender oil and coffee grounds. I buckled in slowly. The hall behind us faded into a blur of yellow lights and indistinct laughter. Somewhere in there, the party still glowed. Somewhere in there, Diane was probably pretending the glass hadn't shattered, the words hadn't landed, the ground hadn't shifted. Jaden drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping an uneven rhythm against her thigh. At the first stoplight, I finally spoke. I didn't come back to win. She didn't look at me, just replied, That's why you did. The words cracked something open, not like glass breaking, but like a window easing up after years of being stuck. Air rushed in. Real sharp, unscented. I looked at her, blinking slow. I thought I needed them to hear me, but maybe I just needed to hear myself say it out loud. Jaden nodded once. Truth isn't a broadcast. It's a mirror. Outside, the trees blurred as the car picked up speed. Granville Civic shrank behind us, a building that used to intimidate me now growing smaller in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed again. Gregory Whitmore. I listened. That's all. I read it 3 times, then without thinking, I swiped left and hit delete. I didn't owe him anything. Not for listening now when he'd never found a voice then. Jaden said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence between us was the kind I chose, the kind I earned, the kind that no longer hurt. It took 7 years to put my name on a window. It only took 3 seconds to decide not to take it down. The lettering shimmered faintly in the morning sun. Clean new gold on glass. Ava Whitmore, author and creative consultant. I stood beside Marlene on the bookstore sidewalk, both of us holding coffee mugs, both of us staring at the fresh decal like it was some kind of quiet miracle. Her fingers were smudged with Windex, mine with the glue residue from peeling off the old A. Finch logo just an hour earlier. You sure? She asked. About which part? I asked. Your name. I smiled. Miss Whitmore sounds better than Miss Finch. She arched an eyebrow. Well, it's not a competition, but I agree. The breeze carried the faintest scent of lavender from her window boxes. The town had already begun its slow bustle, school buses, bakery doors, opening, the clatter of chairs outside the cafe across the street. It felt ordinary, beautifully, stubbornly, almost defiantly ordinary. I took a step back and brushed a speck of dust from the corner of the glass. The motion felt strangely ceremonial, like I was wiping away not just dirt but years of absence of hiding. A woman walking past slowed, probably early 40s. Tidy hair, a canvas tote with a stitched quote I didn't quite catch. She paused at the window, then tapped lightly on the glass. I turned. She held up her phone, open to an article. The guest room on reclaiming language after loss. That's you, she asked. I nodded. She swallowed, blinked twice. I read your piece. It helped me leave someone I thought I owed. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that felt true. Thank you. I'm glad it found you. She smiled, then walked away. No fuss, no signature, no demand to explain. When I stepped back inside, Marlene was already rearranging the front display, slipping one of my books into the front row. You okay? She asked without turning. Yeah, I said. Just taking a moment. She nodded, satisfied. I took my coffee to the back table, flipped open my notebook. My handwriting looked different lately. Steadier. Less like I was bracing for someone to look over my shoulder and shake their head. I'd thought for so long that reclaiming my name would mean confrontation, maybe a lawsuit, a viral video, screaming in public. But it wasn't any of that. It was this, a window, a morning, a woman who walked by and saw herself in my words. The bell above the door chimed again. A girl stepped inside, maybe mid-20s, press badge hanging off her neck, big eyes behind larger glasses. Hi, she said. I know this is unannounced, but I was wondering if you'd agree to an interview. I raised an eyebrow. Not about the trauma, she said quickly. About the rebuild. What you've made. Who you've become. I looked past her, toward the glass, toward the gold letters that no longer made me flinch, then back at her. Yeah, I said. I think I'm ready to talk. She said girls like me confused rejection with trauma. I say she confused love with control. The words rolled off my tongue, steadier than I expected, landing in the quiet like a match on dry leaves. The Portland Public Library's auditorium was nearly full, rows of softly lit faces angled toward our panel. 3 authors, 2 moderators, and 1 empty chair that had stayed symbolically unoccupied all night. The event was called Writing from Wounds, and the title alone made my stomach twitch. But I said yes weeks ago, back when I wasn't sure if I belonged. Now I was sitting dead center, the mic in my hand, the room waiting. I started writing because I wasn't allowed to speak. I said, voice clear. Not loud, but sure. It wasn't an act of defiance. Not at first. It was survival. Language became the only place where my body and thoughts weren't too much. To my left, Miles Grant nodded, not as the cultural journalist he once was, but as a man who knew the long arc of silencing and the revolution of breaking it. Behind him, I spotted Jaden leaning against the back wall in her usual all black. No camera, no notebook. Just watching. Just there. Like always. A girl from the third row raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 17. Hoodie zipped up to her chin, a notebook clutched against her chest like armor. When you wrote about her, she asked softly, "Did you forgive her?" The room froze. I didn't, I said after a beat, but I stopped needing to. A hush passed over the audience. Not judgment, just the kind of pause that came when something unnamed finally gained shape. Miles leaned toward the mic with a half smile. Funny story. Years ago, I interviewed Ava's mother. She called writing a phase, said it was a teenage distraction. Some laughter rippled, unsure but warm. I smiled too. If survival is a phase, I said, then I hope I never outgrow it. That landed. Sharp. Clean. The girl in the hoodie nodded her eyes, never leaving mine. Later, as the panel wrapped and we filtered towards the mingling corner with complimentary tea and uneven cookies, a woman in a sleek navy suit approached me, her badge read, Editor, Salt and River Press. "Your clarity cuts like glass," she said. "We're building a mentorship initiative for emerging authors, particularly those telling stories that resist erasure. Would you consider being part of it?" I stared at her. A moment passed, and then I extended my hand. I'd love to. This time, the keys were mine. No one handed them to me. No one could take them back. The metal was warm from my palm, the teeth still sharp like it hadn't been used much. I turned it slowly in the lock, listening to the subtle click that unlocked not just the door, but something deeper, quieter inside me. The apartment was on the third floor, tucked above a flower shop that always smelled faintly of soil and citrus. There were 2 windows, one facing the street, the other angled toward a strip of sky. The floors still held the scent of fresh polish, the walls crisp in their whiteness, as if waiting to be claimed. Jaden hauled the final box in, muttering something about stairs being the enemy of all friendships. She dropped it with a soft thud near the kitchen nook and stood fists on hips scanning the empty space. "You know," she said, "you've officially surpassed me in adult points. You have a place with a working stove and a plant hook." I smiled. "Don't forget the light switches that don't spark." "That too," she said. "You done fighting?" I looked around the bare shelves, the mattress still rolled in plastic, the frame scan of the guest room in my arms, ready to be hung near the window. "I'm done trying to be invited," I said. "I built this room. No one can unbuild it." Jaden smirked. "You say things like that and make my eyeliner smudge." She didn't linger, just patted the box labeled art supplies, caution magic inside, and said, "Text if you need help assembling furniture, or emotionally unraveling overscrews that don't fit." Then she left. Later, Marlene arrived with a small pot of lemon water, still warm steam curling from the lid like a blessing. She didn't stay, just pressed it into my hands and whispered, "Your light's always been your own, darling. Now it just has a roof." When the door clicked shut behind her, I sat cross-legged on the bare wooden floor, a chipped mug beside me, and let the quiet fill every corner of the room. It didn't feel empty. It felt sovereign. I hung the scan of the guest room near the front window. The text was slightly faded from being reprinted too many times, but I liked that. The imperfections made it real. On the small whiteboard I'd found at a yard sale, I uncapped a dry erase marker and wrote, "This life isn't borrowed, it's mine." The words glowed faintly in the early afternoon light. I exhaled. No echo came back. Just stillness, just breath. My phone buzzed from the counter. Subject invitation, new anthology. Dear Ava Whitmore, we're curating a collaborative book titled Women Who Stayed. Your name was recommended as someone whose voice carries both fire and foundation. I read it twice, then let the phone rest face down beside the window. This time, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't knocking on doors that wouldn't open. I was here. And I was home. They left me with silence. I made it sing. The pen moved slowly, but the ink flowed like it had waited years for this page. Outside the bookstore window, spring unfolded itself across Granville in golden light, soft, unrushed, like the town knew I had one last line to write before anything else could begin. The manuscript sat open across my knees, warm from the sun that poured through the glass. The title page read, "The Girl Who Wasn't Missing, Just Misnamed." Jaden had already read it twice. Her only comment the first time had been "damn." The second time, "This one doesn't flinch." Now she sat across from me at the little round table, sipping tea like it was whiskey eyes on the street. She was quieter these days. Not softer, just settled like a storm that had found a place to anchor. I slid the fresh copy across to her. "New edits?" she asked. "Just one," I said. "The last line." She flipped to the end, read it, and smirked. "Oof, that'll bruise someone," maybe I said. "But it's not for them." Marlene wandered out from the back room carrying a tray of lemon poppy seed scones, her apron dusted with flour. She hummed a tune I didn't recognize, maybe something older than the floorboards beneath us, and placed the tray on the counter like a final offering to the day. "Music?" she asked. "Always," Jaden replied. Marlene flipped on the radio. Acoustic guitar filtered into the shop, soft and steady. For a long time, that was the only sound. We let it fill the space like a kind of benediction. Then the bell above the door chimed. A girl stepped in, barely older than I was when I first arrived. Shoulders tight, fingers tugging at the hem of her sweatshirt. She glanced around like the shelves might judge her, then froze when she saw us. She said. "I saw the flyer. About writing sessions," I nodded. "You looking to write?" She hesitated, not sure where to start. I leaned forward. "Start by naming what hurt you," I said quietly. "Then build from there." She blinked, nodded once, and drifted toward the reading table like it might collapse if she moved too fast. Jaden caught my eye. "She reminds me of someone." "I know," I said. In the reflection of the window behind her, I caught a glimpse of myself bent forward, relaxed notebook, open sunlight across my shoulder. I didn't look haunted, I didn't look small. I looked true. No longer trying to be seen. No longer trying to erase myself, just present. I smiled. Later, after the girl had left with a writing prompt tucked in her pocket and Marlene had turned the sign to closed, I stayed back to write. The light dimmed slowly. The shop's quiet wrapped around me, not like a shroud, but like a second skin. I turned to the final page of the manuscript, and in my cleanest handwriting wrote, "And when they said I'd come back begging, what they didn't know is I came back building." The silence they left me with once felt like exile, but I turned it into shelter, then story, then a life fully mine. I didn't win through vengeance, but by refusing to let their absence define my worth. Like a truth whispered long enough to become thunder, justice came not to punish, but to free. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. If this story moved you, like, share and comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you think the journey still has more to say.